Nyata. Rueben Berg here, one of the co-chairs of the First People's Assembly of Victoria, and just wanted to talk today about the referendum that's coming up. And despite some of the noise we hear all about this, some of the media reporting, some of the political input, this is actually a fairly straightforward and simple referendum. It is about recognition, it is about listening, and the vast majority of Aboriginal peoples support this voice. This was a call for a voice that came from Aboriginal people, from the Uluru Statement from the Heart back in 2017, but it's been a call for our people for a long time. And as I said, it's something that the vast majority of Aboriginal people support. It is quite a simple and straightforward proposal that's being put to the nation. The actual change to the Constitution is fairly straightforward and simple. And one of the things I really encourage people to do is actually go ahead and have a look at that. Because once people have a look at it, it strips away some of that noise that is out there around the referendum. I actually have a little miniature version of it here that I'm going to read out with you here, just to give you a sense of what this referendum is actually all about. So it says, in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, so that's the recognition part, .point 1, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. So that's the establishment of the voice, a way for us to be listened to. Point 2, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So make representations, that's a legalistic constitutional way of saying give advice. And that means that it can give advice in different ways. It means that the government can say, oh, voice, we're thinking of making these sorts of laws. Can you give us some advice? But it also means the voice could sit around and say, well, what ideas do we think should be good for the government? And deliver those to the government and say, this is some advice for you. And it's important that it's to both the Parliament and to the Executive Government, because Parliament is where they sit and they debate laws, they debate bills. But at that stage, things are already in train. Things are pretty much locked in about what those laws are going to look like. It's important the voice can give representations to the Executive Government because that's where the laws are actually created. And you want to give the advice at the time where it can actually be included into the work so that you do get better outcomes. Last .point 3, the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. So that's the element that says this change to the Constitution is about the principle of recognition and a voice, and the detail, that's up to Parliament to decide. That's up to our elected officials to decide. And some people who haven't read the Constitution might think that's kind of strange, but actually that's the way the Constitution works. The Constitution is about the framework, the broader idea, and then what it does is it leaves it up to Parliament to come up with the rest. And so when a lot of people are saying, well, where's the detail? It's not where it's supposed to be within the Constitution. That's not its role. That's not to say there isn't detail and that there won't be detail. There are these really important design principles that were put together by the referendum working group, and they give a really clear pathway about what that detail might look like. And again, I really encourage people to take a look at that. Some of the things spelt out within those design principles are that the voice will not have a power of veto. It's not going to be able to say, government, you can't do this. It's just advice. It's going to be up to our elected officials to make the decisions based on that advice. It also talks about the composition of the voice and that it can't just be hand-picked people from the government. They will be chosen by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. It'll be a democratic process, a representative process, and a process that ensures diversity. There will be gender quotas, there will be specific seats for regions, there will be capacity to ensure that Torres Strait Islander voices are included, youth voices are included. So there's a whole lot of mechanisms there to make sure that it's diverse, that it's representative, and that it's accountable. Because these representatives are going to have to be elected, they're going to have to be accountable to the people who voted them in. There's also going to be accountability in that the voice and the members are going to be subject to the usual procedures of any officials around anti-corruption and those sorts of things. So there's accountability built into it as well. And when people are thinking about, well, what's an example of what this could look like? Here in Victoria, we've already got a pretty powerful example of what that could look like. We have the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. And we are a democratically elected group from different regions with gender quotas, and we represent a huge diversity of First Peoples across this state. And we've been operating since 2019 as a voice specifically around treaty making. And it hasn't been anything that has been of concern to any Victorians, but it has been something that's been benefit to us as Victorian Aboriginal people. So we do sadly hear lots of kind of fear mongering about what could happen if there is a voice. And the reality is, as I said, we've had a similar sort of structure here in Victoria. There's been nothing to fear, and it's brought positive things to our community. There are other concerns that have been raised by various parts of the community around the voice, and particularly some concerns raised by members of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. And I think that's perfectly understandable. We're a diverse community. You wouldn't expect any particular group to have 100% support for something, and the same applies to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. Some of the different perspectives I've heard from other members of my community are that they just simply distrust the government. And that's understandable based on the impacts of colonisation and things we've seen from government in the past. And so because at the moment this proposal is coming from government, even though it was a process that was initiated by First Peoples through the Uluru Statement from the Heart, right now it's a government proposal. And so understandably, some people are sceptical and don't support it because of the fact that it's something from government. There are other concerns that have been raised around the idea that being recognised in the Constitution might affect our sovereignty as First Peoples, that we might lose some rights, our inherent rights that we have as First Peoples in this nation. And all the constitutional law experts who've looked at this and studied this say that there is no concern around that. Our sovereignty can't be affected by this change. And a really clear example of that is that here in Victoria, about 20 years ago, the Victorian Constitution was changed to recognise First Peoples. And that hasn't stopped our capacity to exercise our sovereignty and have discussions around treaty here in Victoria. So there shouldn't be any concerns around sovereignty from this voice in the referendum and this recognition in the referendum. Another concern raised by the community is that it's just not strong enough. They would rather actually have treaty. They would rather have a voice that had more decision-making powers rather than no decision-making powers. And I can sympathise with those views. I think that's a reasonable view to have, that you wish we could have a greater thing there for our people. But to my mind, if we do have aspirations for that something greater, the best way we're going to achieve that is by having a voice. And by no means is it a guarantee that if we have a voice that's going to lead to treaty, it's going to lead to truth. The voice is an advisory thing that can give advice on what we think will get the best outcomes. But if we think the best outcomes are through truth-telling or through some decisions handed over to First Peoples, that's a way we can use our voice to advocate for that. If the voice doesn't get up, that doesn't make getting those other things easier. That makes getting those things much, much harder. So those are some of the different views from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community that I've heard. But I always find it kind of ironic that there is this concern and this interest in finding out what Aboriginal people think about the voice. Because what that shows to me is, here we have this really important decision that people recognise is going to have a significant impact on Aboriginal peoples, and people want to know what Aboriginal people think about that. Well, wouldn't it be useful if there was a formal way to do that? If we had a structured way of finding out what Aboriginal people think about a big decision before it happens? That's the purpose of the voice. That's why we need a voice, so that we can hear from First Peoples about the things that affect them, but not just whoever happens to have the microphone, actually a structured approach, a representative approach, a democratic approach, an accountable approach. And that's what the voice is. The voice will enable First Peoples to have a view, have a say on the things that affect them. And that will lead to better outcomes. It's been shown again and again, when the people who are most affected by something have a say, are able to contribute to the solutions, you get better solutions. And that's really what this is all about. I think all Australians can get on board to the idea that we want better outcomes for First Peoples. It is a travesty in this nation that closing the gap is not closing, not as quickly as we would like it to. And there's no magical solution to this, but a voice is a different way forward. A voice is a better way forward. And I really hope that all Australians come out and support the voice. Thank you. Well, look.